Hey, welcome to the VR Report. I have a special guest here today, Amy LaMeyer. Amy, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
How's it going, Amy? We've been trying to schedule this for a long time. Amy and I are actually not that far away. We actually live in the same neighborhood, so I'm glad that we finally set this up. Amy is also very big into the XR space as also as an investor, but you're going to do a lot better job of giving an intro to yourself. Amy, share your origin story, please.
Sure. Well, right now I'm managing partner of WXR Fund with Martina Welkoff. We have 14 portfolio companies. We invested at seed stage, but some of them have grown since then, and that's across all different verticals, but focused on companies that are using VR, AR, or AI. And they needed to have at least one female on the leadership team on the founding team. So really focus on emerging technologies and diversity.
That's wonderful. With your experience in XR, what are certain qualities you look for in investments?
What we look for in companies that we're going to invest in is a handful of things, maybe three. I can narrow it down to three. One is, do they really understand the problem that they need to solve? Are they using the technology in a way that's going to fundamentally change the solution to whatever it is they're providing a problem or solving the problem for? Another is the timing right for the market? As I'm sure you know, because you've done a lot of work with emerging tech, a lot of times the market might not be completely ready to accept that technology. So is this the right time to build what it is that they're providing? And then the third would be, is this the right team to do it? Do they understand the space? Do they have the grit and the resilience to run a startup? Do they know how to hire and fundraise and build product, or at least to have that team around them to help them do it? Obviously, the team is really important.
That's wonderful. And how do you audit that? I mean, it becomes so tricky because you have only a short amount of time with people, and those are really important three pillars that you look for. But how do you ensure that the team DNA is something that is right for an investment?
You can get a sense of it pretty quickly when you have the conversation. And I can say that sometimes we've had conversations and not invested for a year down the road, right? So by that time, you definitely have gotten to know the founder. That's an example. I knew Inga from Shapes XR for at least a year before we invested there, and she was actually part of the WXR accelerator. So before the fund, there was three cohorts of accelerator companies, and that was one of the ways that we understood, is the market big enough at that intersection of spatial computing and female founder at the seed stage to actually have a fund, but also helped us to get to know the founders and to develop a pipeline for all of that deal flow.
So Shapes XR is really a unique company to invest in your portfolio, especially in the early days. They were part of your, basically you incubated them in the early days. And wow, was that early? Shapes XR, for those that don't know, is a way to actually prototype in XR. It makes the most sense. If you're actually creating an XR app, you should be able to be actually designing and prototyping, what that vision may be. Wow, that was really early. How did you think that the timing was right to invest in something like that? Considering that I think now it's actually perfect timing, considering there's new entrants into the market. But how did you really nail that one, that get that investment to actually identify that they were a right fit?
Yeah, I have to admit, I have an affinity towards platforms. My background is at a company called Akamai Technology. We help to scale the internet. And so I really love the concept of a platform that can be built upon and helps to scale across the board. And that's what Shapes was. But also Inga has a really strong background and a very strong team that helps her understand this space. And she's got the passion to make it happen. So it was pretty clear for us that if we didn't get in early, they were going to skyrocket to a space where we wouldn't be able to invest. So fortunately, we did the first round investment as one of the first venture funds to come in. I think Boost VC was another one. And then we were able to follow on this past year when they raised a larger round.
That's really cool. So I think with those three pillars, you identify who the teams are. Are they competent? Are they going to be able to ship this on time? Is the market ready? But something like prototyping in VR, that's probably not really attuned with some of your principles of making sure that the market was ready. Or did you see like, no, the advancements in hardware will be a lot more evolved in a couple years' time? How did you time that? Like, what was your rationale and thinking behind that?
Yeah, we talked a little bit earlier about what I really think it's going to take for things to skyrocket in terms of XR in particular, not necessarily AI. That's a different conversation. But for VR and AR or anything that's headset based, I've always said that I think it's the intersection of cost, content, and comfort, and when those three things come together, that's when it really the masses will take off. And cost being it's affordable, content being what are you doing on it, and comfort being usability and ease of use. Um, so, what I would say is there are early adopters and there is a market for that. And we do have to start building before we can scale, right? Like there has to be a level of growth. There was in the internet as well. We were building streaming networks at Akamai in 99, but people didn't really stream until like 2006 or 2008. So, you, to a certain extent, there's that understanding of can they sustain themselves until the time that there will be a takeoff and be relevant in the meantime to the right people, right? And this is where enterprises come in, enterprises that are looking to transform their business by using new technology. They have more money to spend. So I really think that, you'll see people like Accenture. I'm sure you've maybe even interviewed folks from Accenture. They're really interested in not only using the technology themselves, but how can they then share that with the people that they're doing business for. So
Yeah, I think big Fortune 500 consultancies like Accenture, um, in terms of those three C's, I think they really find a use case in enterprise because the last C in terms of comfort, I don't think we're there yet. It's a little bit too heavy, but
yeah.
I'll keep up with it just because I am in the industry and I love social games and shooters where I'll probably be engaged and kind of deal with the discomfort, or I'm playing golf with Walkabout Golf and kind of just forget how heavy the thing is. But at the same time, I think there's a certain amount of time that people will just kind of feel uncomfortable. But enterprise, I find out if it's solving a use case that makes people more efficient and makes more money, then people in the enterprise or in the productivity space can deal with the discomfort. Do you think that's true today? Or do you think like that's not even a non-issue considering that there's some new headsets on the market and it's kind of too early to tell? What are your thoughts?
I think it's both. I think it's true. I also think there's a lot of things that you can do in VR in 30 minutes or less, which means it's more comfortable, right? I don't know about you. I can do 30 minutes in a headset. That's not a problem, but I don't want to have a headset on for 3 hours, right? For me, that's not comfortable. Some people do it, they don't have any problem with it. Um, and also, things like Quest 3 are coming out, which it is lighter, it is easier to use. The visuals are better, so there's less nausea. Yeah, we're getting there. They're only going to get lighter, right? We're
That's right.
we're going from those big brick phones to what we carry today, right? And you know, anyway, we'll get there. It's just a matter of time.
That's cool. And I want to take a step back regarding Akamai. Akamai is kind of like the backbone of basically streaming technology, but anything that has to do with processing and showing stuff on screen. Because Akamai was one of the main reasons why even video games took off, and you're able to even stream video games. That background of being an early foundational company like that, was that one of the reasons why you're so excited about emerging technologies like XR? Tell me about your story there.
Yeah. So I was at Akamai for 16 years. Most of the time there, I was doing M&A in the corp dev part. And so that gives me that underlying understanding of, how to assess a startup and its ability to integrate or scale or, um, be successful. And so I was at CES in 2016, and we were doing diligence on a cybersecurity company. And at some point, right in the beginning, it was very exciting to work on this caching company, essentially a CDN, that was helping to facilitate the internet. It was helping to connect people. It was helping to provide information. Like, that was amazing. It was amazing. Um, and then eventually the internet kind of became a utility, a commodity. So there was this shift to cybersecurity, and as important as it is, which it is very important, I wasn't as passionate about constantly fighting an enemy, right? Because that's what cybersecurity is. You're always fighting the next enemy, the next bot. So we were doing diligence on a cybersecurity company, and I saw, you remember January 2016. That's when the Vive and the Rift came out. These first VR headsets, not first, I shouldn't say first of this.
Consumer grade,
Yeah,
that people can find accessible without having an arcade to then buy these machines. Yeah,
yes,
totally.
yeah. Plug into your laptop. You could have them at home. And I thought, oh, that's it. Like, that's the way we're going to start communicating. That's the way we're going to start seeing the world, is this fluidity. Well, and back then it was just VR, but I've started to do some research and understand what AR was, or MR, right? And thinking three-dimensional computing where the digital and the physical layers are fluid. That's the way computing is going to be next, right? Computing doesn't stop. Technology doesn't stop, but there's always change. So I was looking for what is that next thing, and this was what inspired me.
That's really cool. So, in terms of change, what type of advancements do you look for regarding XR that are interesting to change industries? What do you think is unique today?
Yeah, so to go back to that thought of what is going to make cost, comfort, and content actually work. There's a set of underlying technologies to that. Part of it is bandwidth. It's 5G. Part of it is processing power, which we're seeing with, the Qualcomms and the Intels of the world. Part of it is development engines that enable, or technologies that enable 3D development, like Unreal and Unity. Part of it are the headsets themselves. Part of it are the camera and the LiDAR and what's happening in that space. And so what we're finally seeing is growth in all of those areas, which will make the headsets easier to use, lighter, more comfortable, and encourage the development of content. So I'm
Eh,
really seeing, from the ecosystem perspective, we're finally getting to a point where this could be more used on a mass basis.
And I really love your approach, specifically around the WXR Fund with supporting underrepresented groups and, of course, supporting founders that have women part of their executive team. I think this is a softball question, but what are the benefits do you see of supporting underrepresented voices in the XR industry?
Yeah, we focused on gender in particular, even though obviously diversity is much broader than that. And I like to remind people that, again, diversity it's gender, it's race, it's age, it's physical ability, it's sexual orientation, it's class. Diversity is very broad. But we thought, if we focus on women, um, we know that women tend to think more broadly in terms of diversity anyway, so we would have a broader impact on diversity as a whole. And also, personal experience of being only woman in the room, as we were building a lot of the technology, because I started in engineering at Akamai. And so just knowing that we're building for a diverse set of humanity, and that is done better by a diverse set of opinions and a diverse set of people.
I couldn't agree more. When was that turning point where you felt like this was the time to actually support a fund, to actually support these underrepresented voices? When did that occur?
What happened was, in the way I got involved in WXR, Martina with Malia Probst and Abigail Albright, they'd started a movement, and I think it was January 2018, of getting more women involved in the XR community. They called it WXR, and they started an accelerator program for companies that had female founders in the XR space in particular. It wasn't as broad as AI at the time. And I think there were hundreds of applicants that signed up for 8 spots. And there were also hundreds of mentors that signed up, which was a great to know that so many people wanted to support this space. Well, I was one of the people that signed up to be a mentor, and I was one of the people that they selected. So really got involved in WXR then. They did another cohort, and after 2 cohorts, Martina really felt it was ready. It was time that there was enough XR and female founded startups in the seed stage space to justify a fund. And so she reached out to me, and we started fundraising in 2019.
And has the response been very positive, especially considering that, in terms of diversity, it's top of mind for a lot of corporations. Are companies still supporting this as an initiative, or do you see a little bit of pullback? Just educate me in terms of what's the landscape in terms of making sure underrepresented voices are heard.
I think from a startup perspective, we're still seeing a lot of support. Still have folks from bigger companies saying we want to make sure that there's diversity in the system, um, and that is a pleasant surprise. I also think, after being in this space for 7 years, and just at the Economist Metaverse Summit earlier this week, there is a lot of representation, what you can see physically, so gender and race. Um, it was a very diverse conference, uh, both in terms of attendees and speakers, which is a pleasure. And I just think we've done in the XR space in particular, as I compare it to AI conferences or gaming conferences or just general tech conferences. I'm seeing a lot more diversity in the XR space, and that's continuing.
That's cool. And for The Economist, we kind of chatted about it earlier. Regarding that conference, there was actually a metaverse report put out sponsored by Meta. Do you know kind of some of the highlights from that report that you can share?
They're going into relevance and readiness, and some of the things that we've talked about already today. I do need to dig into it deeper, but
Yeah, sorry to put you on the spot. I just thought it was really fascinating. Like The
yeah,
Economist is such a strong publication, or like the, you know, be with all word of how we should actually be thinking as a society in terms of how the economy is run. And I think
yeah,
it's really important that a publication like that is also supporting, the idea of metaverse and XR.
yeah.
And so I was, what was the most interesting thing that you learned while you were there in terms of some of the conversations that you had?
I think it was interesting that a lot of us that have been in this space for a while are understanding that it could be a while longer before headsets in particular, whether it's virtual reality headsets or AR headsets, are truly pervasive. But that there's no shift in the inevitability and the belief that this is the way that the future of computing will go. That is rock solid. Um, and so I thought that was interesting. Even though there's a lot of doubt on timing, there's no doubt on whether it will happen.
And I think you're right. In terms of timing, we're seeing a different groundswell, like in the early days of 2016 when there are new hardware coming out. Apple is now into the mix. Um, ByteDance, who also creates TikTok, also has the Pico headset. There, and from all the reviews that I've heard are very positive. How do you see the impact of new entrants like Apple and ByteDance? Uh, how do you see that affecting the investment landscape?
I do see that since the Apple announcement in June, that there's been a bit more of an interest in spatial computing. Not 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 as significant as I think many of the startups would hope. And whether or not that's just because that there's a realization that until they get to a massive, what are there's 3 billion smartphones out there, I think is the number, 3.2. And we're looking at headset sales being a fraction of that, a hundredth of that, right?
Hmm.
5 years. So there's still such a ways to grow that I think some investors are waiting to see who the winners will be before they jump in. But the Apple announcement, I can't underplay the significance of that, right? They're clearly, we can look across every single major tech company and they've got a play in this or have had, right? Even Microsoft with shutting some things down like AltSpace or HoloLens, they have more IP recently in the AR space than headsets. So, some things, it's something's going on. People believe that this is the way to go. And if Apple's into it, it's serious. We know it's serious.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned this a couple of times, so I hope some people in the audience don't feel like, wow, you're just repeating yourself. But in terms of Apple getting the space, obviously they understand consumer wants in terms of hardware products, and that creating that FOMO of wanting to be around a specific hardware product. And you see how it's also forming the perception of what XR can be. People used to think it was just a niche type of device, but now that Apple's getting into the mix, people are paying attention. Do you think that, have you heard of Apple um, trying to reach out to the XR community natively? Have they been doing that? Have you heard?
Not beyond, well, so yes, there's the engagement that they had as they did the announcement, and so they are working with some developers, right? And some of them are getting headsets, but I don't expect them to fully engage like the others because they never do, right? Like on
Yeah.
any technology. So
And I think that's a misstep, right? Because there's already a community that's been doing this nearly a decade now, knowing the ins and outs of spatial computing. However, I don't see outside of their own internal labs them reaching out to other XR communities that are really active in this space. Why do you think that is? Is it because they already have their ecosystem of iOS devs? And of course, they already have their programming language with Swift. Are they really trying to kind of really cultivate that audience to move into spatial versus trying to get an outside opinion? Or do you think it's because Apple always just does it their way, and developers then kind of abide, considering that they always bring the audience? What are your personal thoughts on that?
well, I think they've hired some folks from our community, right, that are now integrated into Apple. I think they've done some acquisitions, right, in our space. Next VR, I don't, if you remember that one, but it was an early one that I used to watch concerts on.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think some of it, some of that influence, of course, you see it with their live streaming of music concerts. So I think it still lives on. Hopefully.
I hope so. I actually really liked that platform for what we had back there in the early days. Uh, Yeah, it would be interesting for you to do a conversation with Nicole Lazaro. I'm not sure if you know who
Oh
she
yeah, I
is.
had her as a guest. She was great.
Yeah, so she would have a really interesting perspective on Apple in particular. She was one of the first people, if not the first, to write a game for Apple's
That's
smartphone.
right, for the iPhone. She had the
Yeah,
first iPhone game. Yeah.
yeah, and I think she's got a relationship with Apple. Um, they have an entrepreneur camp that's focused on women in particular. So I think they are reaching out to the dev community. I'd have to talk to some of my contacts to see how close that relationship is.
Yeah, I mean, I think the feedback that I've been hearing just from the developer community is that, they have their own internal labs, but even like certain developers that are really key in the space, they haven't got accepted. And some of the feedback that I've heard was that they're really prioritizing certain iOS devs that already have like that sea change type of audience, or that application that already has tens of millions to hundreds of millions of users. And, of course, if they're interested in spatial, it's kind of a better fit. And I can see them kind of going down that funnel, right? And then of course going to the native XR community, and then trying to bring them into the fold. But it's just really interesting. I'm really hoping to hear more
Mhm.
from that side. But in terms of your thoughts on the Apple Vision Pro itself, what do you think of the hardware? What do you think that's unique that they're bringing to the XR space?
Yeah, I'm really excited to try it. So I haven't had a chance to try it. Not many people have. I'm hoping it's that usability piece, that it's way more usable and way more comfortable than what we've experienced before. I thought it was smart of them to market it as a replacement for a laptop and not for a smartphone, because from a price point, that's where it's going to be. And also, just there's a limited functionality right now. Uh, but again, still supremely excited that they've done the first step, because I want to see what the second release is, and the third and the fourth. And I think by the time we get to the third or fourth release of an Apple headset slash glasses, or whatever it ends up being, that's when we're talking about, so what is that, 6 or 8 years from now? That's when we're talking about some significant growth in this space. You're seeing things like the Ray-Bans too. I was able to put those on at the metaverse, the Economist metaverse. But they're just audio right now, almost like a Bose AR, if you remember those.
Yeah, I remember the first time we hung out, you had the Bose glasses,
Yeah.
and I thought they were so cool. That was the first time I've experienced the bone conducting technology, so the sound was super impressive. I really do like the Ray-Bans because it does give you a glimpse of what the future holds with wearable outdoor AR. I mean, of course, you don't have the space, the optical capabilities to have full AR outside, but it does give you an idea of what will happen in the future when you actually have audio, have an AI assistant that you can talk to.
Right.
The only thing that's missing is that optical piece.
Yeah.
Um, do you see a lot of startups now having hypothesis of developing for the Apple Vision Pro, or is it still too early, or are people just really focused on Quest just because the audiences are there now? Has any of those opportunities come across your desk?
Everyone that's building for a headset-based spatial computing is watching what Apple is doing, but most of them, at least our companies, are primarily focused on where there's a group of users right now, and that's VR. That's
Yeah,
for the VR headsets.
that's cool. So, um, switching topics, privacy now, right, is such a
Mhm,
major concern. I think this has come about with Apple, considering that they're a private company. I mean, they're really focused on privacy as a company.
mhm.
That's really, their strong value proposition. And of course, with XR, people get a little intimidated. Like, hey, you got all these cameras and sensors now, and people are gonna know what's going on in my room, and how's that data really being secured? What if there's a hack? um, what do you think in terms of those privacy concerns around data collection and security and ethical standards? How do you see these becoming more prevalent in terms of how people are thinking of designing or building companies when privacy is such a concern?
Yeah. I mean, you had a great conversation with Avi Barzev. He's the founder of the XR Guild, and you know, clearly, and I'm an organization I'm part of, by the way. Um, Clearly, privacy and security are amazingly important. I don't know that we realized it enough as we were building and growing the internet. But hopefully, we'll learn from that, particularly as we're talking about AI. Digital twins. I mean, there's just so many things to be cautious of. Biometric data. Um, I'd love to see ownership of data, personal ownership of data, become easier. Right now, T's and C's, as I'm sure you know, and you probably talked about with Avi, like they're onerous and large, and a lot of times we'll just hit yes, uh, just because we want to do the thing. Um, And I just wish it was an easier, more modular way to control the data that we're passing on from outside of our personal space.
Yeah, I always get wary whenever I do have to accept all terms. I don't know really what I'm signing up for.
Yeah.
But going on a tangent here, I think with AI assistants, I've been using ChatGPT to review contracts that I've been, signing or at least orchestrating. It's been very helpful because you can even use ChatGPT to say, "Hey, break this thing down and give me the pros and cons. Tell me in layman's term what this really means and what the
Mhm.
implications are." And going back to the benefits of emerging technologies like assistants or even like the Ray-Ban glasses, I think having that like safety net of actually democratizing like having a lawyer at your beck and will, or not, they're not officially lawyers, but they at least understand the law based on what's been published on the internet. I think that's also going to, help us get through some of those terms and agreements that we're signing off on.
Yeah.
What do you think about AI assistance today? Because that's part of your, thesis around the WXR Fund of supporting not only spatial companies but also the emergence of AI.
Yeah.
Do you see that as something of a reality in the near term?
Yeah, I mean, one of the companies that we invested in is called Empathic. So, it's empathic without the E. Uh, and what they do, it's a group of technical psychologists, and they understand uh, language and communication. And so they're helping not only humans in real time, but also bots um, reframe how it is possible to say things to in order to communicate better, right? That sense of having more empathy. I love this concept. Um, Again, both for what will be an avatar or a bot, and for humanity. And so, there's one example of the good in AI. It's still very, for them and for many, it's still very manual because we have to make sure that we're pulling from data sets that are actually representative of what we want to do and say. So there's a lot of work in the AI space in order to make things unbiased or less biased, um, and safe.
And safe. I think that's really the key because when we're speaking to even assistants, I had to turn off my Alexa earlier as I forgot to turn it off. Like, all of that is stored somewhere. And I remember having a conversation, I think it was at MIT. I think it was the first MIT reality hack. And it was someone who was also participating, but this person was from Amazon. And it was during when Trump was running for office. And there was actually a correlation to, and this was what someone at Amazon had just kind of told me in passing, which they thought was pretty fascinating, that um, people treated their Alexa assistant very poorly and verbalized this very strongly during different times when there were media, covering Trump. And I thought that was just such a strange and weird correlation. But I thought it was even more strange that, there's people actually taking in this data and figuring out, hey, what do we do with this? How do we, ensure that the product and the user experience is good? And privacy, it just doesn't leak somewhere because that can be very detrimental.
I just think there's a lot that we can do with data without having to associate it with a single human. Um, but the opposite side of that story is personalization. And sometimes we want things to be personalized. And an area that I'm really interested in is personalization of education. And that's such a touchy area in terms of privacy. But imagine if we could understand while kids were young how they best learn. And we could either funnel the information to them in that way so that they would learn things better, or we could expand their minds and help them learn in a different way. So, are you numbers and bullet point based, or do you need a story, a paragraph for somebody to teach you, right? Like they're two massively different ways of thinking and learning. But if we could personalize learning in particular, I think it's exciting and fascinating, but also we have to be really careful.
Yeah, I really love that, right? Because that makes total sense. We have the data, right? We understand, like, maybe we can even take some tests to understand some of the, in proficiencies, and then create a whole curriculum for that person so they can be at an equal of other students.
Yeah. Or
I
excel at the things they excel at. This
That's right.
person is really great at language. Give them 3 languages, give them 5, right?
Yeah, I love that.
I would love that too, but again, we have to do it very carefully.
Yes, yes, 100%. I think that goes to back to the accessibility, topic,
Mm.
especially regarding accessibility and equity are important issues in technology adoption. But how can the XR industry actively work towards addressing those concerns of making like immersive experiences more accessible to people? How do we do that?
There's a decent amount of support for that space already, which is so exciting. Jasmine Cano is a leader in that group for sure. So, definitely follow her. But there's been some conferences lately. Kent Bai, Voices of VR, obviously a podcaster that's been doing it since 2015.
Day one, OG.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's got thousands of interviews at this point, but he's got some good content on accessibility as well. Like it's out there. There are groups doing it, and I would say just support those groups and get engaged there.
In terms of making investments, do startups that really have a strong thesis on this, do they get priority in terms of the WXR fund? Or is that just something that, as long as it falls within those three pillars, it just becomes a nice to have?
Yeah, it's an area of discussion that we have in terms of what are you thinking in this space? What are your plans in this area? But it isn't a specific part of our thesis.
Got it. And in terms of the convergence of gaming and entertainment, but there's like sectors of retail, education, and remote work. How do you see the integration of AR, VR impacting the nature of work and collaboration today? And with some of the investments that you have made.
Yeah, I mean, there's some really interesting ones. We were talking earlier about Tangled. So that's a couple of folks from Alchemy Labs. They did Job Simulator. Still, I think one of the top games in VR,
Hmm.
acquired by Google several years ago. They started to create a new AR game, and while they were doing it, pivoted to remote productivity because they were creating this space that was really enabling work in a way that they hadn't seen before. Some folks there that are using it are small creative teams. If you're watching this episode and are interested, definitely reach out to the Tangle team via their website. Uh, they're they're seeing people in the headset not headset. It's not headset based. It's flat screen based, but they're seeing people use it for 6 or 7 hours a day. Like it's a really interesting way to communicate. And again, that could go headset based eventually when the headsets are comfortable enough to wear that long. Some people do even now, but that I think that that's an interesting remote productivity piece. We have Obsess is another company in our portfolio. Neha Singh is the founder there, and they're doing a lot with virtual stores. Um, and so again, not headset based. Some are, but mostly accessible via screen, but three-dimensional interactive places to buy. I think they've worked with over 150 brands at this point. That's a fun one too.
That's cool. Yeah, I remember Tangle started up, from one of the founders of Alchemy Labs. There's Devin, and then there's Adam, Aaron,
Alex.
Alex. Um, and when he started Tangle, I thought that was really an interesting move, considering that it wasn't VR. But to your point, hey, it can be VR if you want. Um, did they really pivot to just kind of like focus more on 2D experiences, or was that something in their vision to actually have that be more of a social platform with headsets in headset?
Yeah, absolutely a pivot. I think again, realizing that they had something special that would allow people to connect in a fun, creative way that didn't exist anywhere else. As they were creating this other thing, Slack model. As you're building something, or Instagram, as you're building something, you realize that there's another more useful thing that you've accidentally built. So they really pivoted that way. And then just knowing that headsets aren't something that most people are going to wear for 6 or 7 hours a day, at least not at this point. They decided that having it screen based was important.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Considering that most people do remote work, they basically did something unique in the sense that I believe they have like different chat rooms, and you can kind of just drop in on people anytime to actually have like that real or virtual
Yeah,
office
yeah. Everybody
experience,
has
which
their own
is really cool.
office, and you go from one to another. It's great.
Yeah, just like in real life, but you don't have to waste the energy. I think that's
We've
pretty
even
cool.
done board meetings in Tangle.
Very cool.
Yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
You're also in your portfolio, you have some music projects, but I know you're really into immersive music trends, and that's kind of your expertise. What about music and XR in user experiences are you most interested in?
Gosh, it really is my passion. And I look forward to the day that those experiences get even better, because as I see fewer and fewer concerts as I age, or get busy, um, I'm so excited for the virtual space to pick up. I think what Coachella has done has been really interesting to enable AR spaces. They had a VR space in was it in Roblox, I think, this year? Fortnite. It was in Fortnite. I loved what Fatboy Slim did recently. He put out a concert. I'm not sure if you had a chance to
I
see it.
didn't I didn't see that. That's cool. I like Fatboy
It
Slim.
was it was phenomenal. I will say that I had a headset on for part of it, and then I took it off and went flat screen. So they
Hmm.
had both
Hmm.
available, which I think is really smart. Um, it'll just reach a broader set of folks if you can watch it flat. But I mean, in headset, as you know, it's things are way better. It's more immersed. There's more presence. When we get to headset based stuff, this is why flat to me is ultimately not the answer, because that's not what makes it special. We can consume three-dimensional content on a flat screen, but it's not even close to the same as doing it in a headset. But the Fatboy Slim one was really fun too.
That's cool. When I was at Meta, we also had a lot of virtual concerts with like Kid Cudi,
Yeah,
some
and
big names
venue.
like even venues with Snoop Dogg.
Mhm.
And I thought like, wow, this is going to be the killer use case until I actually participated and realized, well, what's missing is that we're trying to replicate a concert experience, which you just can't get in virtual reality, which is,
Yeah.
hey, it's the crowd. It's kind of like the vibe that you feel around being other people. And I said, wow, this is a big misstep, because really what the product should have been was everything that you loved about concerts, but didn't want to associate with all the
Right.
bad things, waiting in
Like people
line,
talking,
yeah,
yeah,
people
a bunch of
talking.
people standing in front of you.
Yeah. And I was like, wow, you don't want to replicate something that only can be done physically, but you should actually figure out ways to have virtual concerts where I'm meeting with certain people that may like a specific song from a specific artist. And we can
Mhm.
get together in a private room and just kind of like vibe out and talk about why we love this particular artist and this particular song. Using technology to enhance the experience versus trying to mirror it. And I think that's something I've learned in XR. You can't just take a thing that people like to do in real life and say, oh, now we'll just put it in XR, because that kind of defeats the purpose. What are your thoughts about that?
Totally agree, and that's the same with the internet and same with smartphones. So with the internet, we couldn't just take the yellow pages and put them on the internet. That didn't work. That's not useful. We instead we have Google Maps,
That's right.
right? Same with a smartphone. We couldn't take a web page and put it on a smartphone. That doesn't work either. I don't know if you remember early days trying to book
Oh, yeah.
flights on on the American website or whatever. Anyway, like you can't, it doesn't make any sense to do that, and it's not where the real value is. So yes, 100% agree. 100% agree. And the Fatboy Slim was actually a really good example of that. It wasn't just a concert. It was this combination of gaming. There were Easter eggs in it. Like you could jump on top, your avatar could jump on top of a record player and it would spin around.
I love that. That's so
It, it
cool.
was it was great.
Yeah, I think utilizing like what you can do in that world that you can't do in real life, like you would get tackled by security if you jumped on the
Right.
turntables.
Yeah.
But things like that really kind of bring more, just more fun into
Mhm.
an XR environment. Um, We kind of touched upon this earlier regarding how technology like Zoom had really proliferated during COVID,
Mm.
and the pandemic, of course, catalyzed the adoption of remote work and virtual events. How do you think XR technology will continue to shape this remote collaboration regarding event experiences going forward? We talked about Fatboy Slim, but what other ways do you think, in terms of work and productivity, do you think will take off?
I'm really interested to see what the codec, you saw the codec experience with what was it, Lev and Mark Zuckerberg in their interview, like holograms going the opposite direction of what we were just talking about of having things that are not duplicating.
Mm.
But I do think, like, if you and I were sitting in a three-dimensional space with as avatars feeling more presence, like, I'm looking for, I would let's do that, right? When that exists, David, let's do another podcast and sit down with each other virtually, but we're in three dimensions, and see what it feels like, right? I think it's going to be vastly different.
I couldn't agree more. I think there's already a screen, almost like a window, that we have these conversations that's always going to be different versus like when we're having dinner or hanging out,
Yeah.
in person. And I really appreciated that demo because it really let you understand how close we are to that reality, right? Why is that important? Well, with the future of remote work, I like working from home, but I do like having those interactions with people. That's what makes us human. And that demo, wow, with Lex and what Zuck had shown, was that we're just so close. And we have the hardware now, the software is coming into fruition, and all of this is coming to kind of a crescendo where all these other hardware players are coming into the mix. That means that these devices will become a lot more accessible, a lot more consumer friendly. You'd be able to get a Best Buy and have your choice of different headsets, and I'm really excited. However, during this time, I'm also, it makes me reflect on the technology itself. Like we talked about a little earlier, I was telling you how kind of bummed out I've been recently, just because of all the news with Israel and with a lot of things that are happening that I've been hearing from my friends there. And I started to come to a realization, like just like COVID had really pushed remote conferencing like Zoom, does VR really take off where it becomes a necessity for everyone when we can't go outside? And boy, did this podcast take a turn for the morbid. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think it would vastly speed up development, and I think it did over the pandemic. Over the lockdown. I just think and a lot of people that aren't in VR or aren't in our space ask why we don't use it. Why it didn't grow faster. And I think it did, but I think, we were talking about that ecosystem of all the technologies that have to be ready in order for it just wasn't ready yet.
Yeah.
So if there was a climate crisis or war, that I do think it would accelerate technology again. That being said, I think we're on the path already. With things like the Apple release, the Quest 3 now, right? Um, a lot of versions of headsets you and I have seen. We probably both have a closet full. Um, we're going to go down that path regardless, I think. But a bad thing happening probably would accelerate it.
Yeah. I mean, wow. I didn't want to like kind of diverge from all the great things that, we were touting about this industry, but I think it's important, um, as a society, remember that this is a technology, and then how do we use this um, to make our lives better? I think if 360 cameras were a lot more accessible and people were on the ground showing some of these horrific acts, I would think that people would also build a little bit more empathy on both sides of what's going on and how this is just all madness. And I'm really hoping for a future where this technology can prove that. That's my hypothesis, anyways. But anyways, changing gears and switching topics. Your experience as an investor. What do you believe are the biggest misconceptions people have of the XR industry? And then how would you address those misconceptions?
Oh, that's a tough question. I don't know that, a lot of people say it's not the time yet, and I don't know that they're necessarily wrong. Um, like we've said earlier in the podcast, I do think there's an opportunity for some, uh, in fact, we have to have some companies right now develop in this space or it won't grow, right? Um, uh, but we really need to lean into usability. Everyone that's building in this space needs to lean into usability. Otherwise, the growth will be um, smaller and slower, right? Somebody who was it? Oh, Maddie Calendar from Boost had this great idea the other day. She said, I was in Disneyland and she said, I looked around and I thought, any of our consumer companies should be here because these are the people that they're building for. And
Mm,
what a good reminder of just, go into a Home Depot and look around. And those ultimately, if you're a consumer company, those are the people you're building for. And keep that in mind. It's not the you and me who will be uncomfortable, who will put up with some 3 or 4 installs and charging the battery and all of those things. um yeah, I just think we need to remember that to help this grow, it needs to be really usable.
yeah, and I think this is now the time, the best time for developers, considering that all this stuff is happening, for mass adoption, like you say, where, your average Joe who may not be as engrossed in this technology, where they feel like this is accessible and without worrying about that this becomes a need, but it becomes very useful. Kind of like how the early days of the iPhone, where we didn't use it for figuring out where the best restaurants are on a daily basis or checking in to find the content that you might love and that's engaging and using it on for hours on end. We're still at the early level, but between now and 6 years, where I think if we do hit that point, developers should start thinking about building for XR now.
Yeah.
And do you think that the interest now has changed recently in terms of companies wanting that investment? Or do you think now, because there's less, I guess, investment in the space, just because everything is kind of like a big question mark right now? What are your thoughts on the social, the, the five force factors of society and what's happening and hyperinflation, and developers building for these headsets? What's your outlook on this
Yeah.
stuff?
Investment is slow across the board. There was just an article, PitchBook pulls together quarterly statistics, and uh, Q3 of 2023 is the lowest venture investment month since like 6 or 8 years ago. Um,
Hmm.
but also everything changes, right? Technology, investing, it all changes. So my expectation is that it will go up. But I think it'll just take some time, because of, again, macro conditions. And I think there's still an excitement in AI. It has cooled a little bit, but there's still a hype there and has been for a year. And there's a little bit more validity to that. There's a little bit more actual use cases in AI. So I think we'll see more investment in that space too. But that combination of XR and AI, that's really exciting. So I think, there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of change that's bound to happen in the next 5 years. Technology doesn't stop. So I think there's opportunity in this space. I think it's just still hard for everybody, almost everybody, to raise right now.
Yeah, I think in terms of the societal issues of inflation, in terms of where we are politically, I think things will calm down. As soon as things calm down, that's when the excitement will come back again in the investment space. What are your predictions for the short term and long term for people that want investment as a startup? They want to come to you, Amy, and say, "Hey, I'm looking for funding." What are some of the predictions that they should know of short and long term, of how they should structure their startup to get the investment that they need?
Yeah, I mean, long-term predictions. are kids born today will ask us, why did we use screens? Why were things flat?
Hmm.
Right? Long-term prediction is all computing moves to almost all computing moves to something spatial. And we're interacting with the physical and digital worlds in a massively fluid way. Um, where both are realities, right? The virtual world is reality and the real world is reality. And we're heads up and hands free, right? No keyboards, right? So that's the long term. Short term is we're shifting to better, more available VR headsets. Um, AR has a bigger opportunity, but the headsets are a longer way away. And so the best case scenario for 3D computing right now is on a screen with the knowledge that, you know, we need to move it to a headset. It needs to be able to be moved to a headset when the headsets are ready. The caveat being, like, there are some things that need to be immersed in VR. You need to transport yourself to a completely different world, and the whole purpose is that. And so those things in particular are always VR, but there's a lot of spatial things that can be done in a mixed reality or augmented reality space.
Amy, that was fantastic. I thank you so much for being a guest. I'm so glad we made this happen, and we'll have to do it again.
Absolutely, when we're codec avatars.
Awesome. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks.